My name is Olivia Parker. I am 30 years old. I never expected a quiet coffee on a Thursday afternoon during the long 4th of July break to become the moment everything I had been carrying for years finally cracked open. But that is exactly what happened, and once it started I could not unsee any of it. I had suggested the coffee shop on the corner near our bungalow because it felt neutral and easy. My best friend Samantha Ellis had the afternoon free, and I told myself I just needed a normal conversation with someone who knew me before the last few years had worn me down. We sat at a small table by the window with iced lattes that were already sweating in the Milwaukee humidity. Samantha asked how the holiday weekend was shaping up at home. I said it was fine, the usual mix of my husband wanting everything low-key and my younger sister Ashley texting about whether she should come over for the fireworks. Samantha listened the way she always does, with her head tilted and her eyes steady. Then she asked, almost gently, whether things had been better between me and my husband lately or whether the little comments were still happening. I tried to laugh it off at first. I said he was just tired from work and that everyone compares siblings sometimes. Samantha did not laugh with me. She set her cup down and said she had noticed it for a while now, the way he would bring up how easy my younger sister was to be around, how she never turned small things into big deals, how she handled family gatherings without making anyone walk on eggshells. She said it out loud in that coffee shop and the words landed like stones in my stomach. I had been telling myself the same story for so long that hearing it from someone else felt like betrayal and relief at the same time. If you have ever sat across from a friend and realized they had been watching you shrink without you fully admitting it to yourself, you will know the particular kind of quiet that fell over our table then. I left the coffee shop feeling raw and strangely clear. The walk back to our bungalow took 15 minutes, and every step felt heavier than the last. When I got home the house was quiet. My husband was on the back patio with the sliding door open, scrolling on his phone. He looked up when I came in and asked how coffee had been, the same casual tone he used for everything. I told him it had been fine. He nodded and went back to his phone. That was the pattern we had perfected over the last 3 years of marriage. Surface calm, nothing worth examining too closely. Later that evening we ended up on the same patio with the string lights I had put up the summer before. The air smelled like charcoal from a neighbor's grill down the block. My younger sister had texted earlier saying she might stop by after her shift, and part of me had hoped she would not. She did. She brought a six-pack and sat in the chair across from mine, kicking her feet up like she always did. My husband handed her a bottle and made some joke about how she was the only one who knew how to relax properly. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest. It was small, the kind of comment that could be brushed off if you had never started paying attention. But after the coffee shop I could not brush it off anymore. I asked him, as evenly as I could, why he always said things like that. I asked why every story about handling stress or keeping the peace seemed to end with a comparison that made me the difficult one. My younger sister went still. My husband looked at me for a long second and then gave the answer I had heard in different forms for months. He said I was reading too much into it again. He said my younger sister never needed everything explained or justified. He said some people just made life harder than it had to be. The words were soft. They always were. That was how he made them land so deep. I stood up because sitting still suddenly felt impossible. I walked inside to get another drink I did not really want, and when I came back the conversation had already moved on to something lighter. My younger sister was laughing at a story my husband was telling. I sat down again and let the rest of the evening pass around me. When they both went inside later I stayed on the patio alone for a while, listening to the distant pops of early fireworks and trying to name the feeling that had been growing in me since the coffee shop. It was not anger exactly. It was the slow, heavy recognition that I had been living inside a story someone else was writing about who I was. The next morning the group chat on my phone lit up with the usual holiday planning messages from extended family. Someone had forwarded a long thread by mistake, The kind of accidental forward that happens when you are half asleep and trying to send one thing to one person. The message that opened when I tapped it was not meant for me. It was from my husband to my younger sister, sent 2 nights earlier. I read it once, then again, because the words did not rearrange themselves into something kinder the second time. He had written that dealing with me was like walking through a minefield some days. He said I turned every small disagreement into a referendum on the entire marriage. He said my younger sister was the only person in the family who understood how exhausting it could get. He said he appreciated that she never made him feel like he had to manage anyone's emotions. There was more, but I stopped reading after the sentence that said he sometimes wondered what it would have been like if he had married someone with her temperament instead. The timestamp showed it had been sent while I was asleep in the next room. I sat on the edge of our bed with the phone in my hands and felt the floor drop out from under the version of my life I had been protecting. The comparisons had never been casual. They had been a running private conversation between the 2 people I was supposed to trust most. The public version of our family, the one with the holiday photos and the easy laughter on the patio, had been maintained at the direct expense of the truth about how I was spoken about when I was not in the room. I did not confront him right away. I walked through the rest of that morning in a kind of suspended quiet, making coffee, answering a text from my mother about whether we were still coming for the neighborhood fireworks display, and trying to decide whether I was going to pretend I had never seen the message. Part of me wanted to delete it and go back to the version of myself that could absorb one more small erosion without breaking. But the coffee shop conversation with Samantha was still sitting in my chest, and the words on the screen had made it impossible to keep pretending the ground was solid. When my husband came into the kitchen and asked if I was okay, I told him I had seen the forwarded message. He went very still. Then he said the same soft, reasonable tone he always used. He said it was taken out of context. He said my younger sister had been venting about work stress and he had been trying to relate. He said I was making it into something bigger than it was because I had been in a mood since the coffee shop. Every sentence was an invitation to doubt what I had read with my own eyes. Every sentence was another comparison dressed up as concern for my sensitivity. I did not raise my voice. I asked him how long the private conversations about me had been happening. He said there were no private conversations, only the occasional vent between family members who cared about each other. He said my younger sister would never do anything to hurt me. I looked at him and realized he believed that. Or he needed to believe it enough to keep saying it out loud. The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument we had ever had. That afternoon I drove to the quiet street where my Aunt Nancy lived, 2 neighborhoods over. I had not planned to go there. My hands had simply turned the wheel in that direction when the wait in the house became too much. My aunt opened the door in her gardening clothes and took one look at my face before she pulled me inside. She did not ask what had happened right away. She made tea and sat across from me at her kitchen table while I tried to find words for the thing that had been invisible for so long. When I finally told her about the coffee shop and the patio and the forwarded message, she listened all the way through without interrupting. Then she said something I had not known I needed to hear. She said that blood relation had never been the same thing as love in her experience, and that protecting your own peace was not the same thing as giving up on family. It was the first time anyone in my family had said something like that out loud to me. I stayed at her house longer than I meant to. When I finally drove back to the bungalow, the light was starting to fade. My husband was on the patio again. My younger sister's car was not in the driveway. I sat in my own car for a few minutes with the engine off, looking at the house I had spent 3 years trying to make into a home that felt safe. The string lights were still on from the night before. They looked cheerful and false against everything that had shifted inside me. I knew I could walk inside and try to smooth it over one more time. I knew how to do that. I had been doing it for years without even noticing the cost. But the coffee shop conversation and the message on my phone and my aunt's quiet words had changed the math. I was not sure yet what I was going to do with the knowledge, but I was certain of one thing. I was not going to keep pretending the comparisons were harmless and the private conversations did not matter. Something had broken open, and I could feel the edges of it every time I took a breath. I sat in the car for another minute with the engine ticking as it cooled, the string lights on the patio glowing faintly through the kitchen window. Then I turned the key off and went inside. The house felt smaller than it had that morning, as if the walls had absorbed the weight of the forwarded message and were pressing it back toward me. My husband was still on the patio. He did not look up when the sliding door opened. I stood there for a moment, the phone heavy in my hand, and then I walked out and sat in the chair across from him. I told him I had read the whole thread. I asked him how many times he had said things like that to my younger sister when I was not in the room. He set his phone down slowly and gave me the same measured look he used whenever I brought up something he preferred to keep small. He said the message had been taken out of context. He said my younger sister had been having a hard week at work and he had been trying to make her feel understood. He said I was choosing to see it as an attack instead of the normal venting that happens between family members who care about each other. I asked him if he had ever told my younger sister that I made his life harder than it needed to be. He did not answer right away. Then he said that everyone needed someone to talk to when things felt heavy. He said my younger sister listened without turning every conversation into a crisis. The words landed exactly where he had aimed them. They were not loud. They did not need to be. I felt the old familiar pull to apologize for having feelings that made the room uncomfortable. I did not apologize this time. I asked him what he wanted me to do with what I had read. He said he wanted me to stop making everything about me. He said the holiday weekend was supposed to be simple and I was the one turning it into something else. My younger sister called while we were still sitting there. She had seen the forwarded message too, or at least the part that had gone out to the larger group. Her voice on speaker was bright in the way it got when she was trying to smooth something over. She said she was sorry the thread had been shared by accident. She said it was nothing, just the kind of thing siblings and their spouses said when they were tired. She said she hoped I was not making a big deal out of it because that would only make the whole family tense for the rest of the weekend. My husband nodded along as she spoke, even though she could not see him. When the call ended he looked at me and said my younger sister was right. He said some people knew how to let things go and some people did not. The comparison sat between us like another chair at the table. I went inside and called Samantha. She answered on the second ring and did not ask why. I was calling so late. I told her about the message in the conversation on the patio. She was quiet for a long moment and then she said she had been worried something like this was happening for longer than I had admitted to myself. She said the comparisons had never sounded casual to her. She said I did not have to keep absorbing them just because the person delivering them used a soft voice. I thanked her and hung up before I started crying. The tears came anyway, standing at the kitchen sink with the water running so no one would hear. The next morning was the 4th. The neighborhood was already filling with the smell of grills and the distant sound of music from someone's backyard. My husband acted like the night before had not happened. He made coffee and asked if I wanted to walk down to the park later for the fireworks. I said I did not know yet. He did not push. That was part of the pattern too. When I did not bend immediately he would give me space, as if the space itself was a kindness I should be grateful for. I spent the morning texting with my aunt. She asked if I was all right and whether I wanted to come over later. I told her I might. She said the door was open and that I did not owe anyone an explanation for needing air. Around noon my neighbor Deborah Walsh came over with a plate of cookies she had made for the holiday. She had seen me sitting in the car the night before and said she had been thinking about me. Deborah was the kind of neighbor who noticed things without making a show of it. She asked if everything was okay at home and I told her it was complicated. She did not press. She just said that sometimes the people who are supposed to have your back are the ones who make you feel like you are asking for too much. She left the cookies and told me to come over if I needed anything. I watched her walk back across the lawn and felt the first small crack in the story I had been telling myself about how normal our life looked from the outside. Later that afternoon, I called my coworker Jason Rivera. We had worked together for 4 years and he had always been straightforward without being unkind. I asked him if he had ever had someone in his life who made him feel like he was the problem for noticing when things were not right. Jason was quiet and then he said yes. He said his own brother had done something similar for years, always framing every concern as oversensitivity. He said it had taken him a long time to understand that the gaslighting was the point. It kept the other person in control of the story. I thanked him and told him I was figuring some things out. He said to call if I needed to talk more. When I hung up, I felt less alone and more certain that what was happening in my house was not something I had invented. My husband found me on the patio again that evening. The fireworks had started in the distance and the sky was streaked with red and blue. He sat down without being asked and said he had been thinking about our conversation. He said he loved me and that he did not want the weekend to be ruined by one forwarded message. He said my younger sister felt terrible about the whole thing and that she had only been trying to support him. He said the three of us had always been able to work through things because we were family. The word family landed differently now. It sounded like a tool he was using to keep me from asking harder questions. I told him I needed some time to think. He asked what that meant. I said it meant I was not going to pretend the message had not changed anything. He leaned back in his chair and gave me the look I had seen before, the one that said I was making life harder than it had to be. He said my aunt had always encouraged me to overthink things and that maybe I should be careful who I was listening to. The comment about my aunt was new. It was a small shift in the pattern, a widening of the circle of people he was willing to include in the comparisons. I felt something settle in my chest, cold and clear. He was not going to stop. He was going to keep adjusting the story until I either accepted it or became the problem for refusing. I stood up and told him I was going to stay at my aunt's for the night. He did not argue. He said he thought that was probably for the best, that I clearly needed space to calm down. The way he said it made the decision sound like proof that I was the one who could not handle normal family tension. I packed a small bag without looking at him. When I walked out to the car, my younger sister's name lit up on my phone. I did not answer. I drove the 2 neighborhoods over to my aunt's house with the fireworks still bursting behind me and the phone face down on the passenger seat. My aunt was waiting on her porch when I pulled up. She did not ask what had happened. She took my bag and led me inside to the spare room she kept ready for visits that turned into longer stays. She made tea and sat with me while I told her the rest of it, the gaslighting on the patio, the way my husband had brought her into the conversation as if caring about me was the same as causing trouble. My aunt listened all the way through. Then she said that some people use the word family the way other people use a lock. They turn it when they want you to stay quiet. She said I did not have to keep letting them turn it. I slept in the spare room that night with the window open and the sound of distant fireworks still drifting in. For the first time in a long time, I did not feel like I had to manage anyone else's comfort before I could manage my own. The feeling was new and fragile. I knew my husband would call in the morning. I knew my younger sister would send messages about how I was overreacting and making everyone worried. I knew the surface of our family would keep trying to close over the crack the forwarded message had made. But I also knew something else now. I had seen the private conversation. I had heard the comparisons out loud. And I had people outside that conversation who were willing to say the words my husband and my younger sister would not. The knowledge did not feel like victory yet. It felt like the beginning of something I could not take back. The next morning my husband called while I was still in my aunt's spare room. I let it ring once before I answered. His voice was calm in the way it always was when he wanted to regain control of the room. He said he had not slept well and that he hoped I had gotten some rest. He said my younger sister was worried about me and that the whole thing had been blown out of proportion by one accidental forward. He asked when I was coming home. I told him I did not know yet. He was quiet for a moment and then he said that staying away was only making things harder for everyone. He said some people in the family were already asking questions and that it would be better if we presented a united front. The phrase united front landed like another comparison. It was the public version of us he was protecting, the one that had always required me to stay quiet about what happened in private. I told him I needed to understand what he actually wanted from me. He said he wanted his wife back. He said he wanted the version of our life where small things did not turn into crises. I asked him if that version had ever included me being allowed to say when something hurt. He did not answer directly. Instead he said my aunt had always had a way of making me see conflict where there was none. The comment was another widening of the circle. Now even the person who had given me a place to sleep was being framed as the problem. I ended the call without promising anything. My aunt made breakfast and did not ask what the call had been about. She simply set a plate in front of me and said I could stay as long as I needed. Later that afternoon she suggested we invite my mother and father over for a quiet conversation. She said it was better to have things said out loud than to let them fester in separate houses. I agreed because I was tired of carrying the weight alone. My mother arrived first, then my father. They sat on the couch in my aunt's living room while my aunt stayed in the kitchen doorway. Close enough to hear but far enough to give me space. My husband did not come. My younger sister sent a text saying she thought it was better if she stayed out of it for now. I told them about the forwarded message and the years of comparisons that had come before it. I told them how my husband had framed every concern as oversensitivity and how my younger sister had participated by listening and agreeing in private. My mother looked uncomfortable. She said families had their ways of talking about things and that sometimes it was better not to dig too deep. My father nodded and added that my husband was a good man who provided well and that not every marriage needed to be examined under a microscope. The words were gentle. They were also the same pattern I had been living inside for years, the one where keeping the surface smooth mattered more than whether anyone underneath was breathing. My aunt stepped forward then. She did not raise her voice. She simply said that she had watched me shrink for a long time and that she was done pretending it was normal. She said blood did not give anyone the right to make another person feel small in their own home. She said if the family could not hold space for me to name what was happening, then the version of family they were protecting was not one she wanted to keep intact. My mother looked at her sister like she had spoken a language she did not recognize. My father cleared his throat and said he thought everyone needed to calm down. My aunt did not back down. She looked at me and said the choice was mine now. I could go back and keep managing the comparisons, or I could decide that protecting my peace was worth whatever it cost. I chose the second option out loud for the first time. I told my parents that I was not coming home that night or the next. I told them I was going to find a place where I did not have to translate every feeling into something smaller so other people could stay comfortable. My mother cried quietly. My father stood up and said he hoped I would not regret making permanent decisions over one message. They left soon after. My aunt sat with me on the couch and did not tell me I had done the right thing. She simply said she was proud of me for saying what I needed instead of what would keep the peace. Over the next week, the distance I had feared began to show itself in concrete ways. My mother called less. When she did, the conversations stayed on safe topics like the weather and whether I needed any furniture from storage. My father sent a text once asking if I was all right and then did not follow up when I said I was figuring things out. My younger sister never called. She sent one message saying she hoped I was okay and that she was there if I wanted to talk, but the offer felt like another performance of unity that no longer included the truth. My husband tried a few more times to frame the separation as something I was doing to the family rather than something the family had done to me. Each time I answered more briefly until I stopped answering altogether. I stayed with my aunt for 3 weeks while I found a small apartment a few neighborhoods away. Samantha helped me move boxes on a Saturday morning. Deborah Walsh brought over a plant for the new kitchen windowsill and said the neighborhood would miss seeing me on the old patio but that she understood why I had to go. Jason Rivera texted once to ask how the new place was and whether I needed help with anything practical. None of them asked me to explain myself in a way that required me to shrink the story again. The partial victory arrived slowly and without fanfare. I stopped managing other people's comfort at the expense of my own. I stopped believing that the surface of a marriage or a family was the same thing as its truth. I set a boundary with my husband that I would only communicate through a mediator if we needed to handle the logistics of separating our lives. He pushed back at first, then accepted it when he realized I would not bend. The loss was real. I no longer had the version of family that showed up in holiday photos and group texts. My younger sister and I have not spoken since that week. My parents keep their distance in the careful way people do when they have chosen not to examine the cost of the peace they preferred. The surface harmony is gone and it will not come back. What remains is quieter and harder to photograph. I wake up in my own space and do not have to measure my tone before I speak. I have conversations with my aunt and with Samantha and with the people at work who do not require me to edit myself into something easier. The emotional freedom after the release is not loud. It does not announce itself with dramatic exits or perfect justice. It shows up in the ordinary moments when I realize I am no longer waiting for someone else to decide whether my feelings are valid. Protecting my peace turned out to be less about winning and more about refusing to lose myself one small comparison at a time. I am still grieving the family I thought I had. I am also no longer willing to trade my clarity for their comfort. That trade never balanced anyway. It only looked balanced when I was the one paying the hidden cost. Thank you for listening to my story. If this story about invisible power dynamics and choosing yourself hit deep, write this one in the comments and tell me what you would have done when the forwarded message changed everything. What boundary would you have drawn, and what would you have been willing to lose to keep it?